Windows on the World. I'm here with Tony Hurst, our producer, and we're going to go into some very interesting things this week. We're going to compile some of the information that we've been putting out over the past few years and compare it and contrast it with this speech from Dr. Richard Day in 1969. Now, this speech has been referred to quite a lot by many different researchers, including David Icke. What I'd like to do is put it in context with the things that we've been talking about. Especially recently, we've had London's dystopia, and last week we talked about, are we all paupers? And yes, according to the state, we are. And that takes us into some very interesting areas, and also these prophecies that have been made. Now, we all know about Brave New World. We know all about 1984, even The Coming Race, which is a book that is well worth a look at. And that takes us into the first subject I wanted to talk about, which is this whole idea we have touched on in the past of social Darwinism. Now, according to Charles Fort, who was this researcher in the 1930s, his idea of Darwinism was, yes, okay, well, the theory of Darwinism is that survivors survive. That's all there is to it. And this idea of social Darwinism was very much part of this elite belief and elite structure of the way things were taken over and assumptions were made on our behalf. And basically, it's the belief that there is indeed an entitlement with certain groups on the planet to assume a responsibility or hierarchy. So social Darwinism is the theory that human groups and races are subject to the same laws of natural selection as Charles Darwin had perceived in plants and animals in nature. According to the theory, which was popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the weak were diminished and their cultures delimited, while the strong grew in power in cultural influence over the weak. Social Darwinists held that the life of humans in society was a struggle for existence ruled by survival of the fittest, a phrase proposed by the British philosopher and scientist Herbert Spencer. And we have talked about Darwinism. It was in our show about intervention theory and evolution. And I've actually prepared a little audio which I'm going to be putting out, which goes over all the major points of Darwinism and actually kind of ridicules it in a way, because some of the statements made on behalf of this belief are so ridiculous that when it's pointed out how ridiculous they are, it kind of stands up as comedy. But first of all, we're going to have a chat with Tony and ask Tony how his week's been and what he's been thinking about. Tony, are you there?
Hi, Mark. Yep, I'm here. My week,
Good.
It's been, pretty just work, really. Same as usual. So I've been thinking about, all sorts of things this week, really. A lot of the stuff that's come my way when I've not been working has been all to do with the mini ice age, but that's for another show, another day, I think, really.
Definitely, we're going to have Piers Corbyn on talking about that. And very interestingly, we've been contacted by several events this week. You know, we did some festivals last year, and I wanted to try and get the whole thing a bit more planned this year so we could do more. And I love being out on the road, meeting people and going to these events. And what's very encouraging is that we get very positive feedback, and more people are knowing what we're doing, but also they're respecting what we're doing, which is great, because it gives you a bit of impetus to carry on, because there's so much work goes into all this. And one thing that we try and do is keep our shows waffle free, because there's so much waffle out there. And I do like pointed and very exact information, and that's what we try and do. And that in itself is actually very exhausting mentally. When I listen to our shows back, I think if I was listening to this for the first time, I'd probably have to listen to it a couple of times. But in a way, that's a very good thing. So we're going to pack in quite a lot of information tonight. But first of all, I'd just like to go over something that happened, this Florida shooting, and it's just brings up something that we've been talking about, and it absolutely proves that television are the media sponsors of terrorism. And it doesn't matter whether it's a school shooting or whether it's a so-called terrorist incident. I mean, it's all the same kind of thing. But I did put this comment on to the CNN video of those two actor kids, whoever they were, in front of the green screen, demanding basically that the so-called children of America, well, they're not really children, these were students, mobilize against the NRA and make this a whole political thing. And what I found interesting about it, nowhere was there any real description of what they went through or how they felt about it, but all of a sudden they've just become militant. They've become this militant force. So I put this quote on that video, and it said, "Green screen gets everywhere, even outside the school." They were in a studio. So basically, you've got these two students, and they're purporting to be at the scene, or the people who are controlling the narrative are making it look as though they're at the scene. And they're not at the scene. They're green screened. Now, anyone who works in media or anyone who watches television will know what green screen looks like. They've superimposed these people. They're in a studio and they're making it look as though they're at the scene. Now, that in itself makes them actors. And the idea as to whether they are actors or students is kind of not the point here. They're actually presenting fake reality. So they're presenting fake news. Those people weren't at the scene, but they're purporting to be at the scene. Why are they doing that? Why aren't they just saying, well, we've got them in the studio? That would be a much more honest approach, but they're not doing that. So they're trying to give you this whole narrative that it's somehow all live and these people are involved. They're key figures at the scene, when clearly they're not. So I carried on. So whether they are actors or not is now beside the point. By being in front of a screen, they are not at the scene. Therefore, by definition, they are actors. And the script is pretty bad too. It's called Too Much Exposition or Over-Egging the Pudding. Now, that got lots and lots of likes on the CNN page. And what's quite astonishing about this is that CNN keep doing it. Now, I don't quite know why they're doing this, because it's been exposed so much. What's your opinion on this, Tony? Because we both know what green screening is, obviously. And it's just very obvious green screening.
Yeah.
They're lit, they're studio lit, and they're outside. You can see the reflection on them from the lighting. It's ridiculous. But why are television professionals doing this? Is it laziness, or is it just their policy? Have they lost all respect for the public? Or is the narrative just being controlled so much now that this is deemed to be acceptable? What's your view on that, Tony?
Well, as a photographer, the only reason that I would have to be going about my business like that is if I wanted total control of the situation. So I think that they've found a way of controlling the situation that works for them. They like to present everything exactly the way that they want to present it. They understand the psychology of imagery, and that's what you do as a photographer, videographer, or whatever. When you're controlling the whole scene and the whole of the light, it's for a reason, isn't it? You'll want to present something in a certain way to people rather than just present them with the evidence as it comes.
Exactly, that's my point. So by definition, those people are actors. So you don't even have to go any further than that in a way, because what you're being shown is a fake reality. So, in other words, when you get a film set, you have people dressed in that film set, you have continuity, everything worn in that film, everything looked at, every product placement, every sip of coffee, every movement, every breath is analysed by the actors, and often over-analysed. And we know what the results of that are. We just get these very stilted kind of productions. But there was points with those two as well, which was interesting, because one of them, the male, his name, it's on here somewhere. Yes, David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez. She's the one who had the Beatles T-shirt on. She had a sort of cropped hair, and she's got a Beatles T-shirt on for some reason. There must be a reason for that. Obviously, it's trying to bring you into some cultural reference or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But why would a young kid like that have a Beatles T-shirt on? You know, when this David Hogg, before he says something, he takes a gulp, and it's totally false. So we've gone from Robbie Parker at the shooting, that was the Sandy Hook incident, who was clearly an actor. And we've got these two, and then we've got this girl who comes on with the black eye. And that just looked rather ridiculous too. But she just gets on there and she starts slagging off Trump for not being empathic and for saying that she was a fan of his, and she's refuting it. So basically, she went into just an anti-Trump rant and then attacking the NRA. She didn't say anything about the event. And it's so ham-fisted, this, that you just wonder about the mentality of the people who are doing it. Is it because they're media people and they're a bit stupid and they're used to everything being fake, and what's wrong with that? Or is it something else? I just can't work it out, because I don't know why they'd want to make things that obvious. I mean, we've had these videos of the ISIS executions, which were these Hollywood productions, which were totally and utterly ridiculous because of the way they were staged. And then you get this, and I suppose it goes into the social engineering of television. Those trained by television will recognize this as some form of reality. It's this, like, two things going on here, I think, Tony. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's also a similarity with something that's kind of a little bit off track, but I think it's kind of important because it's it's to do with space pictures and that. I was watching a video a little while ago from a big YouTuber who does stuff about, UFOs and stuff like that. And this particular video was about the moon and how NASA covers up certain objects and artifacts that are on the moon. And we've got this picture that's shown there with a big pixelated lump on it. And I've had a couple of goes at comments with different people that have claimed the same thing, and lots of them are at it. And you'll see the similarity in a minute. What they're saying is that NASA are covering these images up so that you don't know what was there. Like, you can't see it. They're trying to hide it, but they're not. What they're actually doing is they're covering up the object. Yes, they don't want you to see that, but they want you to know that there was something there. And that's easy for me to detect, because when you use a healing brush in Photoshop or any other image editing software, anyone can learn how to use one in a minute, and you can remove an object from a photograph in just a few seconds with just a couple of touches of your mouse or your pen, right? So there's no way that NASA don't know how to remove, or the people that edit their images don't know how to remove an object without anyone knowing that there was ever anything there. So they're putting it in your face. They're saying, yes, there was something there, and we're not going to let you see what it is, but we are going to let you see that there was something there. And this seems to be exactly the same scenario to me. They keep getting caught out with this green screen, and they keep doing it over and over. It's not just them, obviously. You know that lots of media companies are doing this. It's in your face. They're saying to you, we can do this to you, and you will accept it.
Yes, that's my point, really. And I think it goes into the whole war on terror, the whole of what's happening, and brings everything together, because it is all about this social engineering through images and television. I mean, there is also a side of it that I find quite interesting, in that the people who are behind this maybe don't really want to lie. Maybe the people who are actually employed and having to do this don't really want to lie. As in the case of the 7/7 bombings, that was a very interesting analysis. We went down to the scene of that with David Shaler and Nick Colostrom, and we went round all the various places, including Tavistock Square, and we also went to Luton Station. And the picture that was released to the public shows Khan, one of the alleged bombers, and I'll say alleged because of the investigation that went on afterwards, not the mainstream one, obviously, but Colostrom's book Terror on the Tube was pretty thorough on the whole event. That's worth looking at. But we did some analysis as well, 7/7 Revisited, when we went up there with David Shaler and Nick Colostrom. And those railings at the back, which have now been removed, when you went into the station, you could see Khan was dragging behind the others. Now, in order for that perspective to be right, Khan would have had to have been about 3 foot tall, because those railings came up to the top of your chest, and they were going through his head. It looked ridiculous. Now, and that's the other thing, they were going through his head, and the bars were in front of his body. So the people behind it obviously don't really want to lie. They're going, I don't want to do this. I wonder if the powers that be will notice if I actually give people a hint that this is fake, so the people who are really looking will know. That's an important point as well, because everything's on a need-to-know basis. A lot of people who are trained into television training and not very observant will accept things without really looking at them. But for those who want to see them, maybe they do have to put things there. You know, I mean, it's like this green screening. To me, it's so blatantly and ridiculously obvious. It's not even good green screening. They could do it better than that. You know, what do you think, Tony? I mean, the technology is to make it much better now, isn't it? I would have thought.
Yes, it is. You can do it, well, more or less perfectly. You can even use software such as what they're calling deep fake, which people have got to watch out for, because if you can't spot this sort of thing, what's going on now, you're going to be in big trouble in the coming weeks and months and years, because the software now is pretty amazing. But yeah, it's just like what I was saying there with the pixelated images from NASA and that. You can easily do a much better job, so why aren't they? It's a good question.
Well, it is, and yeah, maybe it's just that the media are lazy. I mean, CNN is a particularly dreadful channel, in my opinion, because of the complete lack of quality of anything they put out.
Yeah.
And they just put out blatant propaganda. I mean, I find it hilarious that these are the sort of people who'd say, well, of course, North Korea's only got state TV, but their state TV can't be any worse than CNN, can it? It really can't.
No, not really. CNN is state TV, isn't it? Really, all of the national medias are now state TV, really.
Yeah, we have to remember in the first Gulf War that they were basically the voice of the whole media, because they were embedded there and we were taking their word for everything that was happening. So that also puts that in a totally different perspective. But that's, again, the war on terror and what's been going on in Syria and the way that's been reported. And we've still got these useless and worthless public servants who are going along with this official narrative. And of course, we heard last week that Brendon Cox has now been disgraced because of his harassment of women at the places he was working. He's been dropped from a couple of charities. He's the one who wanted to attack Nigel Farage through Hope Not Hate, which was set up by Joe Cox Memorial Fund. And of course, she funded the White Helmets. So in my opinion, those are two terrorist organisations working against the interests of the people of those two countries there, Syria and the United Kingdom. It depends what you mean, I suppose, by working against the interests, because destroying the infrastructure, taking the country over and taking out the leaders could be described by the powers that be as part of the modus operandi. That is the operation. But yeah, it's amazing. I've just heard this week also from a little catch up from one of our people who was at that meeting in Leytonstone a few weeks ago. Now, this development in Leytonstone has been postponed. They were going to redevelop these two towers. It's now not going to happen like that. But one of these people approached this Claire Coghill, the CEO of Waltham Forest, who I sent the video to. It's actually the radio show featuring all of those very worthy people, housing officers, people like Gordon Peters, who take down the HDV, stopped it basically in Haringey, this Haringey development vehicle, which meant that Lend-Lease would be the preferred partners of the council, but the council would just have these very few officers being tied to Lend-Lease. And this is getting a bit of a kickback now. But basically, the people, the powers that shouldn't be there in Waltham Forest, as Claire Coghill has said that but the gist of it is this. We don't want to go too much about it, but the people who were at this meeting recently said she was blatantly out and out lying. Now, I wasn't there, but what's been said and what was related to me over the phone earlier this evening was very patronising. In other words, they were stating that, well, we've got some authentic residents from there. We've met a family from the two blocks. And as if the people at the meeting weren't representative of the tower blocks. Well, a lot of the people at the meeting were talking about the bigger picture of what's going on. And it's very difficult to get people to these residents' meetings, which is, in a way, why all this is happening, because it happens by your implied consent. And that's what we were talking about last week. Are you a pauper? Well, it looks like you've been classed as one, But if you know your inalienable rights, then you can be competent. And that is the main thing. You have to show these people that you are competent and they're incompetent. And I think we've been doing that quite successfully over the last few weeks. We've embarrassed quite a few of them. We've got some killer quotes from one in particular. I won't bother to mention him this week, Tony. It's going to get a bit boring, but regular listeners to the show know who he is. Also known as Cabinet Member for the Environment for Waltham Forest. But what's interesting is this lady was saying that this local authority, this Waltham Forest, they have no more money. And there seems to be money being siphoned off away from repairs. And this is the same local authority that congratulates themselves every 5 minutes on Twitter by saying that our officers caught somebody fly tipping and issued them a notice. Now, the picture is actually somebody who's put some old cushions by some bins, by some wheelie bins, you know, the big dumpster bins. Now, how can that be fly tipping? So they're barrel scraping to an extent that's unimaginable here. And then another picture was of someone's front garden who's obviously been doing a bit of building or ripped the house apart and chucked everything in the front garden. And they were issued a notice as well. Well, Waltham Forest Council, this is not fly tipping. That's somebody putting some junk from the inside of their house to the outside, which you are employed and actually duty bound and liable to take away, because you, by your own admission, will do 2 of these removals a year. I think it's more, actually. So, in other words, they are barrel scraping to such an extent that they're making up fake crimes. Now, wait a minute, somebody else has been doing that, haven't they? Remember our show on Kent Police?
Yeah.
Crime farming. So maybe the councils are getting into creating crimes for themselves as well. And obviously it's all good for the revenue. And they're employing all these people to go around checking your bins or seeing if you've got some rubbish in your garden, seeing if you've dumped something by the dumpster that the council are duty bound and liable to take away, and then issuing you with a notice because they're stating that you've been fly tipping, which brings us obviously to the person we won't mention this week, who actually brought a court case against a lady who gave away a cardboard box, and she got done for fly tipping. Her company's name was on this cardboard box that was found somewhere. And of course, the court case cost £15,000, and the judge called it a monumental waste of public money. Now, that goes some way to explaining how all this money is being siphoned off and how repairs aren't being done. Maybe that's what it is. They're spending a lot on bureaucracy. There's so much going on, especially in that borough, where there is basically, they've got people working there who are spying on people and trying to control the narrative. And it's nothing less than Stasi. It's nothing less than the Soviet system. And that's what they want. And that is exactly what's being enforced. And I follow a lot of these police organisations on Twitter now. And I think it was the National College of Policing was stating it was a great idea that probation officers were going to be given tasers. And then some idiots put underneath it, some trainee police person has put, we should be giving them to teachers too. I mean, if these are the people who are meant to be in charge of so-called what we call law enforcement, and it is enforcement now, it's not upholding the law, it's law enforcement, then it goes to show what we are being given as public servants. These people are public servants, and they want to be armed to the teeth against us. Now, that is not a good idea in my experience, because if those 2 clowns who attended my property in 2015 who assaulted me, those 2 clowns in costumes known as PC Nelson and PC Wood of Medway Police Station, if they'd have had tasers, I have no doubt that they would have used them on me. So when people of that mentality are being given toys like this, it's not a good idea, is it, Tony?
Not at all.
No.
Well, I don't know. We've gone through it a lot, haven't we? Had a power changes people and that, and you give someone a powerful weapon like that, and it's a different form of power, isn't it? And we've seen the consequences, the results in this country and abroad. So I don't think it's a step forward.
Not at all. Before we get into tonight's show, we have covered the City of London and how it is the global centre, and also we've talked about the issuance of bonds and debt. We know all about this, how debt is basically being manufactured, and we're going to get into that a bit tonight. But this is a quote from Descent into Slavery. It's a book by Des Griffin about the City of London. And he said, the small clique who rule the city dictate to the British Parliament. It tells them what to do, and when, in theory, Britain is ruled by a Prime Minister and a cabinet of close advisers. These fronts go to great lengths to create the impression that they are running the show, but in reality, they are mere puppets whose strings are pulled by the shadowy characters who dominate behind the scenes. History clearly reveals that the British government is the bond slave of the invisible and inaudible force centred in the city. The city calls the tune. The visible and audible leaders are mere puppets and dance to that tune on command. They have no power, they have no authority, in spite of the outward show. They are mere pawns in the game being played by the financial elite. And that took me into an article which I posted on the site a long time ago. And it was called The Crown Templars. And you can find it at windowsontheworld.net. It's very interesting. And it goes into the occult history of the City of London, going on from the Templars and the Templar Church and what that means and what that meant to the City of London. And we have covered this a little bit in the past. We've covered things like the Fire of London. We did some shows with Chuck O'Celli all about the city and the power structure there. But tonight, I want to go back in time a bit to this document that was known as the New Order of Barbarians. And it was a lecture where this Dr. Richard Day, who was professor of pediatrics at Mount Sinai Medical School in New York, and he'd previously served, interestingly, as medical director of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which is now Bill and Melinda Gates. He gave this speech outlining to the students, off the record, no one was allowed to record it, of how things were going to unfold and why. Now, this fellow who was there, called Dr. Dunnigan, who was formerly a student of Dr. Day at the University of Pittsburgh and was well acquainted with him, though not intimately, he describes Dr. Day as an insider of the order. And although Dr. Dunnigan's memory was somewhat dimmed by the intervening years, he's able to provide enough details of the lecture to enable any enlightened person to discern the real purposes behind the trends of our time. And this is a transcript of a loose conversational monologue. And it goes into a lot of the things we've been covering. So I thought it'd be good to join these two things together, because we've talked about the hidden principles of social governance, conceptual power. The conceptual power behind government is the highest level of social governance. Now, we're talking about social engineering here. We're talking about the power structure. Now, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of power are accessory drive belts from the Communist Party, or for the Communist Party. This is according to the KGB. And we've gone over some of these documentations before. So now any state that does not understand this does not understand the situation. States are not governed by presidents or governments. There is no word for the subject of governing, but they use this idea of conceptual power. So we have this party system of left, right, and centre, and shepherds are selected for the whole system of moods. Now, isn't that interesting? So George Soros intimately knows about this. So what he's done is he's created these groups, which are basically one group going in one direction, but they cater for the whole system of moods. In other words, a whole system of ideological subversion. So whichever ideological subversion you like, he's trying to cater for, but they're all going into the same direction. So that makes complete sense. And that makes complete sense with what we're seeing happening at every single level. And the system of parties, according to the Soviet system, is just a standard control system. There's nothing clever about it. It's basic, it's childishly simple, and it's enforced through the legislative, executive and judicial branches. And they keep everything in the corridor, and they punish those who move out by means of the judicial branch, which is where we get to when we're trying to get remedy. So that's all controlled as well. The only thing we have on our side are our inalienable rights, and those are still quite important actually, and we can use them against subversives, because subversives do not like inalienable rights. They hate being made accountable, and we talk about this over and over again. The Saul Alinsky model is to attack the individual and not the organization. So what we have to do in return is attack them individually, but we're not attacking them. We're making them publicly liable. And that is very important. And there's a great biblical quote here, even though I'm not great on biblical quotes, but I think it's a good one. It's from Jesus, and it says, "Know what is in front of your face, and what is hidden from you will be disclosed to you, for there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed." Now, that's very true when you start scratching the surface. So that was true a couple of thousand years ago, and it's definitely true now. So if we go to this tape one of 3 tapes, which was basically recalled by Dr. Larry Donegan in around the he's re-released this in 1991. I think it was available a little before that in the 80s. Now, as here, there's a question. The Dr. Day starts with a question. Is there a power, a force, or a group of men organizing and redirecting change? Now, isn't that interesting that he uses the word change? Whenever we get any new puppet in Parliament, they always talk about change. Whenever you get any new puppet in local government, it's all about change. And we know them, we call them change agents. There's several MPs who I won't bother mentioning. People who know who they are because they're on television all the time spouting generalized nonsense and propaganda. And they have no belief in anything. They are there merely as actors, and they enjoy it because they love having their nose in the trough, because they've got huge egos and they're extraordinarily shallow. And we could probably, at the head of all that, we could say that Sadiq Khan is a fine example of that. I won't go into the MPs, but I do follow them on Twitter, and I make my opinions of what they're saying known to them, as I do with all of these organizations now. In fact, if anyone follows me on Twitter, they'll find I follow literally hundreds of police organizations, because I want to make them aware of what I know. And they don't respond, but I want to bring it in front of every police force in the country, what we've been outlining on our shows, because it's important. And these people are public servants, so let them know about it. And I think that's a good way of doing it, because once you start this, other people will start joining in. A lot of people subscribe to these organizations. I would never have dreamed of subscribing to them years ago, probably from fear of ridicule. So what you're following them for? But people who follow Windows on the World will now know why I follow all these organizations. However, it carries on here. Is there a power, a force, or a group of men organizing and redirecting change? It says here, there's been much written and much said by some people who have looked at all the changes that have occurred in American society. Now, this isn't just about American society. This is worldwide. This is the global action plan they're really talking about here. Indeed, of the world, it carries on. The conclusion that there is a conspiracy of sorts which influences, indeed controls, major historical events, not only in the United States, but around the world. This conspiratorial interpretation of history is based on people making observations from the outside, gathering evidence and coming to the conclusion that from the outside they see a conspiracy. Their evidence and conclusions are based on evidence gathered in retrospect, period. I want to now describe what I heard from a speaker in 1969. This is the preamble, which in several weeks will now be 20 years ago, and this was in 1990. The speaker did not speak in terms of retrospect, but rather predicting changes that would be brought about in the future. The speaker was not looking from the outside in, thinking that he saw conspiracy. Rather, he was on the inside, admitting that indeed there was an organised power, force, group of men who wielded enough influence to determine major events involving countries around the world. And he predicted, or rather expounded on, changes that were planned for the remainder of this century. Now, this is very important because, as we've said before, we tend to think in terms of our own short lifetimes. Now, the people who are behind all this do not think like that. They know that they have an action plan which is ongoing. This is hundreds of years into the future. Now, it doesn't always work out exactly as they plan, which is where it's interesting, but generally it's going along the right lines. Now, it carries on. I believe you will be impressed with the degree to which the things that were planned to be brought about have already been accomplished. Some of the things that were discussed were not intended to be accomplished yet. This was by 1988. Note the year of this recording. Yeah, that's 1988, but are intended to be accomplished before the end of this century. This is a timetable. It was during this session that some of the elements of the timetable were brought out. We plan to enter the 21st century with a running start, it says. Now, and it says in the next section, everything is in place and nobody can stop us now. He said, as we listened to what he was about to present, he said, some of you will think I'm talking about communism. Now, this is important because we talk about the Soviet system and communism because that is the model. However, it's not the traditional model of the Soviet system we're talking about here. We're talking about a technocracy. So I think this is a very important point because a lot of people are into this very cozy, mollycoddled version of communism which we have in the West, which has nothing to do with what it is. So people with elbow patches and basically high academic qualifications often spout great things about communism, but that isn't really what they're talking about. We're talking about a system which is genocidal. That's the whole point of it, because it's about control of everything and control of population with an elite running it. And these useful idiots, the ones that Yuri Bezmenov talks about, these useful idiots in local government and the leftists and all these people who Soros has been recruiting, are going to be the first casualties of it, because they don't want those people around. Those people, when they turn against the state, are going to be a problem. So they are going to be wiped out. So all of these useful idiots and the people who attack us and people who attack people who are putting out information and start calling them silly names like far right or fascist and basically things that don't exist, then they are the first to go under this system. They will be completely exterminated. Those groups will be targeted. And I think this is a very important point because Yuri Bezmenov, the Soviet defector, he brought this up again and again and again. It's in all of his lectures that leftists, they would never bother with them. They need to recruit the narcissists, hence what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, the useful idiots that are already in place, the narcissists in your local council, the narcissists in the police force. I mean, look at what we've got heading the Metropolitan Police, this Cressida Dick. She got promoted because some security forces person shot an innocent man 7 times in the head. That's why she was promoted. And they just do not respond when you put this in front of them. They do not respond to that at all. I mean, they are constantly coming out with soundbite after soundbite, and there is no substance to any of these people. There's none. So that's the major point, that these narcissists, these useful idiots, are probably the ones that we need to start to bring down, because they will find other people to take over from them. But making them publicly liable, I think, is the most important first thing. However, it says, this is what Dr. Day says about everything is in place and nobody can stop us now. His purpose in telling our group about these changes that were to be brought about was to make it easier for us to adapt to these changes. Indeed, as he quite accurately said, they would be changes that would be very surprising and in some ways difficult for people to accept. And he hoped that we, as sort of friends, would make the adaptation more easily if we knew somewhat before what to expect. So he's talking to a peer group who he assumes are going to be involved in the implementation of this change, which is very interesting. And it carries on. People will have to get used to change. Now, we hear this all the time. It comes from the UN. Nobody will be left behind. Or UNESCO. They say no child will be left behind. Nobody's going to be left behind. In other words, there is no room for any view outside this absolute police state system. There is no room for anything outside it. And we see that with what's happening with the attacks from the Soros-led groups, which according to useful idiots and puppets like the LBC puppet, James O'Brien, is some kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, when in fact we know that Soros went against the Jews in the Second World War and he's got no conscience about it whatsoever. He's a player. And in actual fact, when you listen to what he says, from his point of view, it makes absolute sense. He just wants to be on the winning side, and he knows about psychology. And he openly says that. So in a way, we can't go and say that these people are evil. That's not the point. We need to actually understand what the system is and why and how it's doing things. Then, and only then, can it be subverted. And we have to think in terms of that now, because subversion is what's being used against us. So we have to subvert the subversives. We have to use their rules. Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, as basically introduced by David Cameron in 2011. We said we're going to be using Saul Alinsky rules, and we've been through those on previous shows. Look up Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, and you will see how a lot of things are being controlled. Because when I pointed this out to a friend of mine, that we were being absolutely bombarded with this stuff, and it's about basic intolerance of anything outside the consensus. And a consensus is not agreement. It's the word used by useful idiots when people are made to look as though they agree. So basically, yes, he's saying that people are going to have to get used to it. People will have to get used to the idea of change, so used to change that they'll be expecting change. Nothing will be permanent. This often came out in the context of a society where people seem to have no roots or moorings, but would be passively willing to accept change simply because it was all they had or had ever known. Excuse me. This was sort of in contrast to generations of people up until this time, where certain things you expected to be and remain in place as reference points for your life. So change was to be brought about, change was to be anticipated and expected and accepted, and no questions would be asked. Another comment that was made from time to time during the presentation was, people who are too trusting, people don't ask the right questions. Sometimes being too trusting was equated with being too dumb, but sometimes when he would say that and say people don't ask the right questions, it was almost with a sense of regret, as if he, Dr. Dave, who was given the speech, were uneasy with what he was part of and wish that people would challenge it and may not be so trusting. So this guy is trying to say, this is what's going to happen, and it's for the overall good unless you question it. What you have to do is oppose it with an argument. It's like law. If you haven't got an argument, then you're incompetent. Find someone to argue for you. And that's what people do in council meetings and all around. If you go to any of these meetings, you'll find people just standing up and all the questions are staged. I mean, this is another thing. It's not just this control through Delphi technique of public meetings. It's also about the way that all of these so-called events have people chosen. For instance, years ago, this is when I found out about this. I mean, I've known that they did this before. I went to this Hackney Young Business Enterprise Awards presentation because it was cheap. We could get, I think 3 of us went for about 60 quid, and it was champagne and dinner, and it looked a bit of fun. So we all went and sat around this table. And then the bombshell hit us. Alan Sugar turned up to do this presentation. and my friend, I was given a bit of paper, and it said something like, Well, Alan, what do you think is the best way for positive business expansion? A completely meaningless and useless thing that he could waffle on about himself for hours with, right? So it's an open-ended nonsense thing. So I gave it to my friend who said, Alan, what do you think of British film and would you invest in it? He says, don't know anything about it, not interested. Next question. But what I should have asked him was are you conclusive proof that money does not bring happiness? But I never got round to that. But that was quite shocking because that was meant to be kind of an informal event where just a few business people had attended just to ask a few questions. But all of these public meetings are controlled like that. And the Delphi technique is the one. We've been to all of these regeneration meetings all over London. So what this fella's actually saying here is that he wished people would object. That's a very important point because I don't think that's come out when other people have put this information across. They tend to dwell on the goals and what this is really about. But I'm trying to get underneath the context of what this fellow was really trying to say here. And this is another really important point we're getting onto now, the real and stated goals. Another comment that was repeated from time to time, this particularly in relation to changed laws and customs and specific changes. He said, everything has two purposes. One is the ostensible purpose, which will make it acceptable to people. And second is the real purpose, which would further the goals of establishing the new system and having it. Frequently, he would say, there is just no other way. There's just no other way. So what he's doing is inviting challenges here. This second to come as a sort of an apology, this seemed to come as a sort of an apology, particularly when at the conclusion of describing some particularly offensive changes, for example, the promotion of drug addiction, that he'd say these things. Now, what was interesting was that he goes through a whole list of things here which tie into everything that's happened, from population control to extermination of the elderly to Agenda 21. It's all in there. It's not talked of as Agenda 21 or this regeneration plan, but the hive cities, everyone being pushed into cities, it's all in there. It's all about living in tiny apartments. And basically, a big part of this is getting rid of cultural reference. Now, we see this all over London. London is not the same city as it was 10 years ago. You go to the centre of London, it's been ripped out by the HS2. You come out of Tottenham Court Road Station, you wouldn't know where you were. You could be in Croydon, and that's the point. Everywhere's starting to look the same. And I noticed this even in the city of London. The landmarks are disappearing around these huge glass buildings. You can't even find your way around anymore. And there were certain places there which were great landmarks, but you can't see them anymore. And people say, oh, this is progress. Well, it's not. It's actually about destabilisation. And it's about taking away history. A big part of this is taking away history and cultural reference. He gets into population control. He says he was very active with population control groups. Of course he was, because he worked for Planned Parenthood. The population control movement and population control was really the entry point into specifics following the introduction. He said the population is growing too fast. Now, this is what we're hearing all the time, obviously. Numbers of people living at any one time on the planet must be limited, he says. Now, this is the assumption, you see. This is the assumption of this kind of social Darwinism, that they have taken it upon themselves to do this on our behalf. We will outgrow our food supply and we will overpopulate the world with our waste. Now, this is actually a very, very important point. Yes, okay, I'm just getting some comments in. Stu, it's going to be a carbon credit, sustainable development, austerity-based, population-controlled, rationed economy. Correct. Eric von Essex. Sadly, Britain has been subject to ideological subversion since the 1930s. Absolutely right. Stalin knew he couldn't beat the West militarily, hence his investment in the Frankfurt School. Yes, of course, and that's great, that is, Eric. But the thing is that I hope we're not just preaching to the converted here. I mean, it's great that people know about this, but we need to get these terms out more simply. I mean, I covered this many years ago with an American cameraman who came to London, and we were talking about these change agent groups and basically the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And of course, a lot of these useful idiots who are socially engineered, call it a big conspiracy theory. And of course, the whole idea of conspiracy theories came out of the social engineers. So it's a very circular thing. And taking it apart is, well, it's a science within itself, and simplifying it is the art. The art of all this is being able to take it apart so we don't use their terminology. We can actually simplify it. And I've been trying to do this for years, and it's incredibly difficult, and it gives you a bit of a headache. But I love editing and getting things down to what they really are, the actual element of what we're talking about here. And we do try and do that on these shows. And yes, thanks for the comments. So basically, I'll carry on. And yes, it carries on into permission to have babies. People won't be allowed to have babies just because they want to, or because they are careless. Most families will be limited to 2. Some people would be allowed only 1, etc. Now, that's all Planned Parenthood stuff. Population control, controlling births, redirecting the purpose of sex without reproduction, and reproduction without sex. Well, from population control, the natural next step then was sex. He said sex must be separated from reproduction. Sex is too pleasurable and the urges are too strong to expect people to give it up. Chemicals in food and in the water supply to reduce the sex drive are not practical. The strategy then would be not to diminish sex activity, but to increase sex activity, but in such a way that people won't be having babies. Contraception universally available to all. Now, this is really interesting, this part, because it goes into the detail of condoms being on sale in shops, that because at the time when this guy was around, they weren't available over the counter. They were kind of under the counter. You'd have to ask for them. And obviously the old joke of going into the barbers in the 60s when he'd say, "Would you like something for the weekend, sir?" And he'd have some condoms there that you could buy that no one could see, you know. So it was all under the counter. But what they were saying is that it would be available everywhere. It says here, yeah, and they were unavailable. Contraception would be displayed much more prominently in drugstores, right up with the cigarettes and chewing gum. Exactly what's happened, out in the open rather than hidden under the counter where people would have to ask for them and maybe be embarrassed. This kind of openness was a way of suggesting that contraceptives are just as much a part of life as any other item sold in the store. And contraceptives would be advertised and contraceptives would be dispensed in the schools in association with sex education. Now, all that's happened. That's absolutely happened. And they go, the next part is sex education as a tool of world government. The sex education was to get kids interested early, making the connection between sex and the need for contraception early in their lives, even before they became very active. At this point, I was recalling some of my teachers, particularly in high school, and found it totally unbelievable to think of them agreeing, much less participating in distributing of contraceptives to students. But that only reflected my lack of understanding of how these people operate. He's talking about the controllers here. Yeah, I've got another message in here. I'll try and answer them this week. If you think the hippies movement and punk was to do with youth culture, it's more to... Yes, absolutely, yeah. I mean, funnily enough, I went to see a couple of punk bands last night. One was from the early 80s. And you can absolutely see how everything has been socially engineered. But what I would say about that was there's a slight music hall quality about it that's quite interesting. A lot of that was kind of music hall, whimsical silliness. You know, there's quite a lot of those sort of bands around, and that in a way can be a bit of fun. But yes, the whole of that punk thing was really ideological subversion, because a lot of the more political bands were really pushing this radical kind of politics, which is now Antifa. And of course, if you said anything about population control, basically, or about sort of immigration, you'd be a fascist and you'd be racist. And this was all how they did it. They basically, they equate people who are worried about their borders with xenophobia and fear of foreigners, when it's nothing to do with that. It's to do with practicality. So yes, they go off on completely politically naive tangents that really have nothing to do with anything. You're absolutely right about that. And of course, the hippie thing, yeah, it was totally controlled. We know that as well. And everything is really, I mean, we go into these festivals, they're getting more and more controlled. Of course, we're so proud about being banned from the Green Gathering. It was such an achievement because the people who banned us made such fools of themselves because they didn't have an argument. They were saying that I lacked academic rigor Well, nothing that I put out lacks rigor. It's all true. I don't put out hearsay. These people responded with lazy, arrogant nonsense, which is the mark of the change agent. And this is how we get them. We absolutely ridiculed those people for what they were. And we've got a lot of people on our side. So in other words, they might have to start listening to the people who attend the event and start listening to common sense. That may not happen because their funding tends to come from the climate change lobbyists and all this sort of stuff. You know, they get their money basically through promoting their own disempowerment. And this is what we're trying to get over to these people. You're actually working towards your own slavery. The whole point of this thing called Festival 2025 is to get everybody into the Sustainable Development prison camp. So basically, it won't be a music festival anymore. It'll just be a concentration camp for the weekend. Well, what's the point of that? So that's why we're encouraging small festivals. I've been contacted by Merthyr Rising, which I think is in May this year, and they've got a great lineup. And ironically, I was talking to one of the organisers, Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales, for anyone who doesn't know. He was saying that they've been attacked by these Antifa-type lunatics. These terrorists are attacking them for having free speech. Now, the whole thing about the Merthyr Festival is that it's about the uprising there. And, of course, South Wales was the place where a lot of the real original Chartist movement came out of, who were really anti-government. So it's so ironic the way things have turned around. So we've got these people now who are meant to be the radicals. They're meant to be the new protesters. They're actually doing exactly what their puppet masters want them to, and they're clamping down on anyone who is trying to stand up for their own rights or individual rights or even having a bit of fun. So, yeah, that's all part of this plan, which was outlined in this document, which can be found on Windows on the World. And it's called New World Order, New World or One World Order. I'll give you the title in a minute. It carries on. Tax-funded abortion as population control. No surprise then that the next item was abortion. And this, now back in 1969, 4 years before Roe versus Wade, which is some case law, he said abortion will no longer be a crime. Abortion will be accepted as normal and will be paid for by taxes. Now, this is a very controversial subject, which I don't think we've got time to go into tonight, but I would like to go into future. But there's two sides to that story there. I mean, when women are basically pregnant and they don't want the child, I can see that there is a very good excuse they have for abortion, but it seems to, in my view, create terrible mental problems for the particular people I've known that have had abortions. They've had very, very serious mental health problems through it. And I don't want to generalize. I'm just saying that's my experience. So I think that's kind of an important point. Again, it's about destabilization, people being destabilized, encouraging homosexuality. Well, have we seen any evidence of that? I mean, we're going about people being misgendered now. Now, 5 years ago, I wouldn't even know what that meant. But people are being actually approached by the police because they've misgendered somebody. We know this. It's in the papers. It's absolutely ridiculous. And how can there be any more than two genders? There can't be. So that's just a fact. And we're being pushed with this narrative all the time to the point of ridiculous now. And I think that's where we should have some humour with it, because I worked all my life in show business and I was around transvestites all the time, and they can be absolutely neurotic people. So I think what they're doing is they're just encouraging neurosis, really, in my opinion. I don't really even want to get into that because I'm a bit bored with it all now. And some of these fashion shows that have been coming up recently, I mean, there was one I was looking at today, slightly different thing, but it's like it goes around this Marina Abramovich, where she's having these people putting their heads through tables as though they've got severed heads, and even Katy Perry's doing it with fruit around her face, and you've got these life-size human dolls being cut up with knives and they look as though they've been hacked to death. And what is this about? This is really creating mental illness. You've got models walking around with their own severed heads. And I don't know really about the people who go at these fashion shows. There seems to be a terribly vacuous element of people involved in all this who just like to think that, oh, it's a little bit shocking, oh, it's daring, oh, it's this. They don't think about it. That's my opinion. I'd like to get some people on actually from London Fashion Week and talk to them about this, because what you see is that you just see these these skeletal remains walking around carrying their severed heads and dressed like, it's like a comedy show to me. But maybe I'm missing the point. Maybe we need to get some designers on. And a friend of mine was at a fashion show the other day, streaming it actually. And I just said it's curtains for them if they wear that again. It just looked like they were wearing old 50s curtains, really baggy curtains, you know. So, yeah. Tony says, break when you're ready. I've gone on and on this week. And there's quite a lot more to get through. I even wanted to get onto some other stuff. But we'll have a little break now, I think, Tony. Yes. What do you think of the show so far? Are you understanding it?
I am indeed. You're doing a good job, as usual, putting it out there. Someone wanted an explanation in the chat for your use of the term concentration camp. I suggest you look it up in a dictionary, and on windowsunderworld.net there's an extensive back catalogue of what Mark thinks about that. Fill your boots and
yeah. Well, I went to many festivals last year, and it is a concentration camp. So it's a concentrated amount of people in a fenced-off area under control. Under control, basically, by private security and the police. So that is very important. All the bigger festivals are basically concentration camps. That's just a fact. You're there, you're under supervision, and you're under control. You can get drunk, you can take drugs, which is all in this document, because that's encouraged, because that means that you become incapable. It means that you're no threat to anybody. And that's all part of it as well. But I mean, I went to Boomtown not this last year, but year before, and there was a girl there died on the last day. She'd taken an overdose of ketamine or something. But the thing is that they don't mind the drug thing, but they want to keep everybody on. They want to get a feeling of overt control, and it is overt control at these events because you have everything searched before you go in. You have to have a brand. You have to have a stamp on you, or you have to wear a wristband for the whole weekend, which is a tag. So you're tagged when you go in. You're allowed to walk around and spend money. There's certain areas you're allowed to go to. There's people with dogs walking around. So what's the difference? I don't get the difference. What's the difference between that and a concentration camp? I can't really see one. A concentration camp is merely a holding place for people who are under they're basically under control. They're under an external control. So what's the difference? There isn't one. You know, I like the small festivals where there's just very limited control because they know that the people who go there are not going to be trouble. They kind of know their audience. And you don't see the police there. You don't see private security there. You don't have bouncers searching you before you go in. I went to a great one last year called Harlequin. We did some talks there, and there's just basically volunteers on the gate. They know that the sort of people who go there are not going to be out of control, out of their heads on drugs. So basically it's all about responsibility. They know that their audience are responsible. So they take their kids there. Their kids are going to be safe. Their kids can run around. As Piers Corbyn found out, he had about 20 of them. He put him in a boat in the woods. It was glamping, and Piers, I went to find him, and there was about 20 kids. He was in a boat, and his head was looking out of a porthole, and I thought, where is he? And I just heard, "Go away, go away." And he was basically being tortured by a load of kids about 8 o'clock in the morning. But that's the idea, that things can be a bit of fun. But we're talking about this Festival 2025. It's just going to be police state, absolute police state. It's going to be fascism in their words, because they love the word fascism, to use that as though it's a big problem and you're all fascists and you're all clamping down on my rights. Well, that's what they're doing. They're clamping down on all your rights. All these people like the Green Gathering, all they're doing is clamping down on your rights. Who wants to go to an event in the middle of a field when you've just got these basically absolute dictators with the green iron fist stamping on your head, you know?
Yeah,
so
I've just done some of that. I've just been a dictator. I've been iron-fisted. I've just done my first ban in 4 years of doing internet radio, running chat rooms and that. I've never banned anyone until today, but I just did. Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
I feel you banned someone from our chat room, Tom.
Yeah, I feel really powerful. I feel, I don't know, strong. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, I mean, I don't know the circumstances here, Tony. Maybe we'll have to review it, but I do trust your good judgment, and we do have a few people who have been causing us a few problems, as you do when you put information out. But the thing is that they're working from a script and we're not, you see.
Yep. I don't know. Mostly pretty much anything goes in the chat. But when people are just deliberately trolling and deliberately trying to, bring everything down and put a different light on things, I'm not going to put up with that for too long. I've put up with him for weeks and weeks, really. He's had his little go, and now he's gone. And I will deal with him if he comes back in another form, because it's just off-putting, isn't it? We've got serious business to be done here.
Yeah, we don't need distracted by nonsense.
We don't need that.
It's like having mosquitoes around or something. They just distract you from what you're meant to be doing.
Yes.
I mean, we're putting out information here. It's important information. And the thing is about this, I do it because I feel it needs to be done. These parasites who come in, who try and destroy it, are basically educated beyond their own intelligence, most of them. And I've been attacked. The whole story is going to come out, Tony. We've got a great story coming in the next few weeks.
Yeah,
and we're going to be naming these people. This is a big story, and it's something that's happening all over the country. And we're talking about terrorism here. I'm not talking about people trolling chat rooms. I'm talking about terrorism. And I'm talking about people libeling people. I'm talking about people who are putting people's lives in danger, and they're rich, middle-class social justice warriors, virtue signalling and hiding behind who they think are ethnic minorities or people who they should virtue signal from behind. And they are the worst kind of racists. They are the worst kind of hypocrites, and they're absolutely deluded. And unfortunately, there's quite a lot of them, but fortunately, they get found out very quickly. Shall we have a break, Tony?
Let's do that. Dragon Boat to Valhalla, Psy Ambience. Well done, Mark. Cheers, everyone. We'll be back in 6.5 minutes.
Welcome back to Windows on the World. Now, we're going to talk about this document by Dr. Richard Day. I can still hear the music, Tony. Oh, yes, we're fading out. Yes, welcome back to Windows on the World. I can hear myself in the background now.
Right, there's no music on here. And
all I can hear is myself talking what I've just said.
Okay.
I can hear myself playing back.
Well, that's a problem your end, I believe. I haven't changed anything, Mark, since we did the last thing.
Okay, right. All right, we seem to have a bit of a technical problem then. Okay.
Right, we could reboot the Skype call. Right.
Okay, then let's do that. Yeah, seem to have a bit of a problem.
Hold on a second. Right. Let's put the Windows on the World thing on and we'll reboot the Skype call.
Okay, all right.
Reversal of the poles. In the passage of time, there will always be our souls.
Right, okay, we've sorted it. We're back. Go on
We've
then, Mark.
sorted it. Sorry about that, Tony. It was because I came in and the music was still playing. I had the stream on. I'd left it as open as a window, so I won't do that again. So welcome back to Windows on the World. That was quite confusing, actually, because I heard myself, and it was what I'd said previously about a minute before. So it was more than an echo. And we don't want to be in an echo chamber, do we, Tony?
No.
We're trying to get the word out here.
We're doing our best, but we're relying on all of these people that are listening, because although we don't want to be in an echo chamber, we are being pushed into an echo chamber by Google and your Facebooks and everything else out there that's big is pushing us into echo chambers. So we do rely on you to spread the word with this, what we're doing here. So please keep doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's very encouraging, actually, that I got a call the other day from someone who's putting on a very big festival later this year and was very well aware of what we were doing, which didn't surprise me completely, but I was quite happy that to hear that, that this big event with quite a lot of well-known speakers, and not necessarily just in the field of geopolitics, but even entertainment, and he's trying to cross over into make it more of a kind of enjoyable event with real news media. So that's quite an interesting take on it. And he said, yeah, I've been well aware of your work, and it's very important what you're doing. So that's encouraging. And this year should be good fun, because we're going to go around to some of these smaller events and do some talks and make lots of new contacts. I've had quite a lot of people contacting me from all over the country, which is great. And obviously we want people around the world listening and getting in touch too.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best to join you for the Merthyr Festival, and maybe we'll be able to broadcast live from there, do the whole thing complete from that place.
Yes, I think so. I think that's a really good idea, because that also makes it rather more exciting as well. We had a few problems last time we did that with actual getting a good signal and making sure that we could hear each other. Well, that's part of the fun, I suppose, rushing back to a camper van and seeing what happens.
Yeah, we'll have a few different options this time. I'll bring a couple of options, and I know you've got at least two now, so I reckon we'll get something sorted.
Yes, and getting back to this, I've just put a quote. We've had this quote quite a few times from UNESCO. Learning has not taken place until values are changed. That's the National Council for Education in America, which is obviously the Common Core system, which we have. And basically everything outside the programmed worldview is defined as hate speak. And we find that is the general narrative. But getting back to this Dr. Richard Day lecture, he stated that families are to diminish in importance. And this was interesting because this was in 1969. Obviously, it was well underway by then. It's been going on since the 50s. It said families would be limited in size. We already alluded to not being allowed more than 2 children. Divorce would be made easier and more prevalent. Most people who marry will marry more than once. More people will not marry. Unmarried people would stay in hotels and even live together. That would be very common. Nobody would even ask questions about it. It would be widely accepted as no different from married people being together. More women will work outside the home. More men will be transferred to other cities and in their jobs. More men would travel. Therefore, it would be harder for families to stay together. And we can see what the results of all that are now, and the disenfranchisement that's going on. And of course, that's the tip of the iceberg when you look at the amount of social cleansing that's going on in London. People are just being relocated miles outside the area, even to places like Birmingham and these coastal towns. They're all being basically kicked out of London. Now, it says here, but one of the net effects of easier divorce laws combined with the promotion of travel and transferring families from one city to another was to create instability in the families. If both husband and wife are working and one partner gets transferred, the other one may not be easily transferred. Soon, either gives up his or her job and stays behind while the other leaves, or else gives up the job and risks not finding employment in a new location. It says here as a side issue, rather a diabolical approach to this whole thing. Now it goes into the next section, which actually says euthanasia and the demise pill. everybody, it says here, has a right to live only so long. Now, this is exactly the Agenda 21 principles, isn't it? It's that we all have a right to live, they say something like a fulfilled life. Now, they keep it very woolly because they're not allowed to say that you've got rights, because under these Agenda 21 principles, you don't have rights. You're granted certain entitlements, basically. And that's the interesting thing, that our inalienable rights, which come from divinity and the fact that we do have souls and all the rest of it, and we can prove that we are not paupers, is very important. Because what they're constantly doing, what we've been talking about really in this whole show, is the diminishing of importance of any kind of divine or creative spark. They want to destroy that, because this just leads to people wanting to be more knowledgeable, get more personal power to do things, and freedom. And freedom is the thing which is not talked about in this new paradigm. We are being restricted, and that also comes in with this document. It's all about travel restriction. Now remember, this wasn't a document, this was a speech by Dr. Richard Day in 1969, and it was just jotted down from memory by this Dr. Dunedin, who was one of his pupils, and he put it out much later. But most of it is very, very, well, it's poignant as to what's happened. I mean, it's poignant in the respect that you can see how this stuff's been coming in ever since, and there's no stopping it. And the result of all this regeneration in London is exactly what's talked about in this document. All is that they're not making public at the moment is basically the euthanasia program. So it goes on here, euthanasia and the demise pill. The old are no longer useful, they become a burden. You should be ready to accept death. Most people are. An arbitrary age limit could be established. After all, you have a right to only so many steak dinners, so many orgasms, and so many good pleasures in life. Now, you see what they're doing? They're reducing everything down to this physical kind of machine-like and very low intelligence approach to life. Yeah. And after you've had enough of them and you're no longer productive, working, so in other words, once you've had enough of indulging yourself, it's not about how you progress, how you become more informed, what you learn, how you put the bigger picture together. It's how much kind of distraction that you indulge in before you die. That's what they're talking about. How much distraction can you have before you drop dead? So it's a very interesting thing, this, because all of this has absolutely come true. I mean, the distraction issues now are the issues. There is nothing that comes out of mainstream media that is not a distraction issue. Everything is. Once it's analysed, it's all distraction. So there's some things that would help people realise that they had lived long enough. He mentioned several of these. I don't remember them all here. It says, here are a few. Use of very pale printing ink on forms that people are unnecessary, that people are necessary to fill out, so that older people wouldn't be able to read the pale ink as easily and would need to go to younger people for help. Automobile traffic patterns, there would be high-speed traffic lanes, traffic patterns that older people with their slower reflexes would have trouble dealing with. Well, we can see it's gone one step beyond that now, as to actually getting everyone down to the slowest speed possible. Speed limits in cities are ridiculous. 20 miles an hour is absolutely absurd if you're trying to travel around somewhere at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and you've got some idiot in front of you, useful idiot, driving at under 20 miles an hour. All that does is cause agitation. And even the police don't drive around at 20 miles an hour. It's ridiculous. And that's a big part of it, making people frustrated. And of course, we have the 40-foot pavements being put in everywhere. I'm in North London, and just down the road, you've got a massive, so they're narrowing the road. So we're getting the roads narrowed.
Yeah, because they was big enough already, weren't they?
That's right. Yeah. So you're talking about an infrastructure that was really built for hardly any traffic. And if you look, it's interesting actually, isn't it, when you look at these old films of the 1950s and 60s, and you look at London and there's just no traffic. You look at the North Circular Road and there's nothing on it.
Yeah, there's still a fair bit of it in the city itself that was actually built for horses and carts, and including
Correct.
that tunnel we was talking about the other day as well, the Rotherhithe, wasn't it?
The Rotherhithe Tunnel,
Yeah.
that is a horse and cart tunnel, and well, a Blackwall Tunnel's bad enough, isn't it, But that one is, that takes some navigation, that one. And actually, it's probably right that has a 20 mile per hour speed limit, that particular one. But
yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, but the Blackwall Tunnel doesn't have a 20 per hour speed limit, does it? I mean, it's ridiculous. So you've got open roads that have a 20 miles an hour limit on it, and then you kill yourself on these road humps, pumping out loads of fumes. I mean, it's quite funny, really, because when I was in Nepal, you get areas of road that aren't road. The tarmac stops for no apparent reason, and you've just got these potholes which can be up to a foot deep, and everyone's trying to navigate the way around, and it's just like bang, bang, bang. But parts of London are like that. They are getting like that because it's not that so much of holes, even though a lot of these sort of side roads are falling into disrepair. You've got all these crazy sort of elongated humps, and it's totally unnecessary. It's just like torture. It's traffic trauma. They call it traffic calming. It's traffic trauma, and all that's in this speech. All of this stuff, limiting access to affordable medical care. That makes eliminating the elderly easier. Well, we're going into that. It's going to be private. That's what they're saying here. Because what a burden it is on the young to try to maintain the old people. Then the young would become agreeable to helping mum and dad along the way, provided this was done humanely and with dignity. And then the example was there could be like a nice farewell party, a real celebration. Well, this is like Soylent Green, isn't it? It's like going to see the video of how the earth was when before that it had been completely destroyed. And then you got injected with a drug, and then you got thrown into the dumpster and turned into Soylent Green. Mum and dad had done a good job, and then after the party's over they take the Demise pill. Now this, bearing in mind that this fellow was just telling a load of students this in 1969, it must have completely freaked them out.
Yeah.
There's planning the control over medicine. This is interesting, because this ties into another part of what he was saying, that they were going to basically make curing cancer illegal, and that's exactly what's happened now, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly illegal to claim in this country anyway, and quite a lot of others, that it's illegal to that you've cured any cancer. So
absolutely, under the Cancer Act that was, but I mean, they've taken it to new levels now.
Yeah. So, but we do know for a fact that there's many people out there, many thousands of people in the world that have had terminal cancers that have been told, and they have managed to heal their bodies one way or another. We know that for a fact.
Yes, they were talking also in this not only about the privatisation, making healthcare unaffordable so that you would choose, or they would choose your demise, but also turning them into what they were calling psycho prisons. This did not mean necessarily medical treatment at that. It was basically to confine people. They're going to use hospitals to confine people, and also restrict access to hospitals. In other words, you needed ID to get in, very strict ID to keep people in and out of hospitals. So at that time, I did not know the word psycho prison is in the Soviet Union, but without trying to recall all the details, basically he was describing the use of hospitals, both for treating the sick and for confinement of criminals for reasons other than the medical well-being of the criminal. The definition of criminal was not given. It means enemy of the state when you go through this stuff. But that's interesting because we had that chap on a couple of years ago, and I was at the People's Voice, and he got sectioned under the Mental Health Act in quite a scary way for giving out leaflets basically saying that the Crown wasn't legitimate and the monetary system was fraudulent. Now, both of those things happen to be true, but in my opinion, however, he was forcefully injected and taken away to a secure mental hospital. Now, there's nothing wrong with this guy. He was actually an NHS electrician, and it was only because of the fuss that we kicked up with many other people. There was some people in Coventry who helped out as well, and they were the only reason I think this guy got released. They actually forcibly injected him at the hospital, and then they let him out, but they then took him from his own home to a secure mental unit, and they also kidnapped his wife. Now, people say this sort of thing doesn't go on, but it does. In fact, I was contacted several weeks ago by somebody who was a carer for their elderly parent, and I don't know the background to this story at all, but they stated they'd been taken to a secure mental health unit in Kent. Now, I never heard anything else after that. I did send them several emails, but I'd like to know how much of this is going on. Obviously, the thing about all this is that when people go through these ordeals, they often get post-traumatic stress and disorders, and they can't face up to actually talking about it, which is another important issue here, this kind of trauma-based mind control that goes on. And that's what the system's set up to do. That's why when you go up against anything, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Crown Prosecution Service, the police, or your local council, they are set up to reject your claims. They are set up to absolutely drive you mad by going round in circles, which is why publicly talking about these people is probably the only way forward, in that people set up forums and they start publicly naming these people. In other words, using the Saul Alinsky nonsense that these fake groups use against the public servants, because they're using it against us. Elimination of private doctors. The image of the doctor would change. This is interesting. No longer would he be seen as an individual professional in service to individual patients, but the doctor would be gradually recognised as a highly skilled technician, and his job would change. The job is to include things like execution by lethal injection. Now, can you imagine being a student in the 60s and hearing this stuff? It would have totally freaked you out. Yes. The image of the doctor being a powerful, independent person would have to be changed. And he went on to say, doctors are making entirely too much money. They should advertise like any other product. And we've seen how doctors have been basically taken over by lobbyists and drug companies. Lawyers would be advertising too. Keep in mind, this was an audience of doctors being addressed by a doctor. And it was interesting that he would make some rather insulting statements to his audience without fear of antagonising us. Well, I think this guy was actually trying to wake them up with what he was saying, because it does say at the beginning that he had this very weary persona because he did not believe that anyone was going to stand up to it. And he was only saying that it was the right thing because people weren't object. They weren't protesting. They weren't objecting. If you don't object, you agree in law. So you have to object. So if you don't object, you are in agreement. And that means they can say there is a consensus, which is the fake consensus talked about by all of these useful idiots and politicians and people in public office. They create something called consensus, which means that everybody is seen to have agreed. It doesn't mean they've agreed in their terms. In their terminology, it means we make it look as though everyone's agreed. So yeah, the solo practitioner would become a thing of the past. A few diehards might try to hold out, but most doctors would be employed by an institution of one kind or another. Group practice would be encouraged. Now, isn't this the case? This is absolutely what's happened. Mm-hmm. And that has basically given the model over to privatizations. A few diehard doctors may try to make a go of it, remaining in solo practice, remaining independent, which parenthetically is me. That's what he was saying. But they would suffer a great loss of income. They'd be able to scrape by maybe, but never really live comfortably, as would those who were willing to become employees of the system. Ultimately, there would be no reason at all for the solo practitioner after the system is entrenched. And it's already that corporate system now. New, difficult to diagnose and untreatable diseases. Next heading to talk about is health and disease, he said. There would be new diseases to appear which had not even been seen before. He's talking about AIDS here, actually. That is a very interesting one because that was in 1969. suppressing cancer cures as a means of population control. Cancer, he said, we can cure almost every cancer right now. Information is on file in the Rockefeller Institute if it's ever decided that it would be released. But consider, if people stop dying of cancer, how rapidly would we become overpopulated? You may as well die of cancer as something else. Efforts at cancer treatment would be geared more towards comfort than toward cure, palliative care, and of course, chemotherapy and all the rest of it. There was some statement that ultimately the cancer cures which were being hidden in the Rockefeller Institute would come to light because independent researchers might bring them out, despite these efforts to suppress them. But at least for the time being, letting people die of cancer was a good thing to do because it would slow down the problem of overpopulation. So that's the situation we're at now, isn't it, Tony?
It's exactly the situation, yes. We've got an increase in the rates of cancer, massive increases in the rates of cancer, and there are claimed survival rate increases. People are living longer with cancers and that, and I believe that to be true. But it's all down to medicine. People are using all this you know that word, don't you?
Pharmacological.
That's the one. They're using all of this stuff, and they're obviously making a lot of money out of it every year. But they've been suppressing cancer treatment since as far back as the 1920s that I know of, maybe even longer, with Royal Raymond Rife and his inventions and that was the first one that I know of. And then we've got Hoxsey, we've got Gerson, we've got the Budwick diets, all of those three. We've got cannabis oil, we've got balancing the body pH, we've got what else have we got? B17, according to many, is effective for some. We've got lots of things that have been known to heal the bodies of people with terminal stage 4 cancers of various descriptions, and there's documented evidence of that from scientists and medical people from other parts of the world where they've embraced these things and moved them forward of that being total fact. So you can't deny that there is actually, something that I can't say for legal reasons out there. So why can't I say it?
Exactly the point. And this is why I think that everything now should be done underground. We don't go telling people what you're doing, because that's the only way to deal with a system that wants overt control of everything. You can't have that. You can't have this interference in your right of volition.
That's right.
That's the whole point of it. And that's what we sort of talk about all the time, really, is I'm affronted by the fact that these people think they can make decisions on my behalf.
Yeah, I've missed out an important one as well.
Yes.
The research of Dr. Linus Pauling. He's a Nobel Prize winner, and he was ridiculed for his research at the time, as are so many others that come out with, what he claimed was a cure for cancer. I'm not claiming it, he claimed it. But vitamin C, he claimed that no cancer can grow in a body with enough vitamin C in it, and it's been taken up, his research, by one of the big universities in America, and they're having astounding results apparently out there. And I know people, there's many stories on the internet, but I don't actually personally know anyone in this regard that have used something as simple as carrot juice to heal their bodies when they've had terminal cancers. But sodium ascorbate, it's spelled ascorbate, but it's pronounced ascorbate, is a daily supplement that everybody should really consider taking. Look into it, research it, because it's cheap and it's extremely effective, and it will stop you getting all sorts of things going wrong with your body. So check that out. Yeah,
it's a very difficult situation when you know people, as I have, and most people who are listening have, who are going down the conventional route and they're taking the chemotherapy and they're believing what's being said. I mean, it's happened to a friend of mine a while ago, and there's two sides to it. You think, I don't want to actually disturb them any more than they're disturbed already with all this, so I'm not going to actually beat them around the head and tell them to try alternative cures. It's a difficult situation because people, they say, well, I'm having the chemo, or I'm having radiotherapy, or I'm doing this, and they've given me this long to live. I mean, it takes us back to the conversation I had with the ITN News editor, Chris Choi, who was introduced to me by a friend. And I was talking to him about what we were doing, and he couldn't really understand why we were doing what we were doing for nothing. He couldn't really understand it because he's a careerist. He earns his money by being an actor on TV, which is what he is. And he presents information that is basically given to him. He doesn't do any research, I don't believe. But if I'm wrong, they can get in touch. But I gave him some information about prostate cancer, of which there seems to be an epidemic, apparently. This is what I'm hearing through the mainstream, that the cure for that, we had the cure because a friend of mine had actually done the research, cured his friend of prostate cancer. He was given 3 months to live, and within 2 to 3 weeks of taking this, which was ginger, graviola and nettle tea, it went completely. And the doctors said, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. So he did. Yep. And he's completely clear of it now. And I said that to Chris Choi and someone else, and they basically jumped at me like a pack of wolves, like I had absolutely destroyed their best china. It was unbelievable. I mean, the reaction was violence. And then I got my friend who cured this guy to send him the information. And he sent me the email that he'd sent to this ITN news editor. And he said, like you, I'm a skeptic. However, I'm not making any claims on behalf of what we used. I'm just telling you that it worked. And according to medical practitioners, it works because of this. And he gave him some exposition as to how and why it worked. No response. So these people who are feeding us this nonsense through television are in accordance with everything they are told. They are unable or unwilling to actually look into anything themselves. And basically they were saying to me that it was an insult to the dead and the dying. Now, can you think of anything more absurd than that? I can't. That is the post-truth world in a nutshell to me.
No. You know, as a journalist, this man's claiming to be, then he should be open to new information, and he shouldn't be discounting any of it until he's thoroughly investigated the claims, should he?
No. And that takes us back to what we were talking at the beginning of the show. Screen actors and green screens. You know, then the whole of all this comes down to people's perception, their perception of reality. They've been given this absolutely ludicrous view and accept it. And the majority of people will do, because the whole of the education system is set up for those who believe it. So that's why this is interesting, because we've got an academic here talking to other future academics about what's going to happen. And it all has. I mean, there's some really disturbing stuff in here. For instance, inducing heart attacks as a form of assassination. Another very interesting thing was heart attacks. He said, there is now a way to simulate a real heart attack. It can be used as a means of assassination. Only a very skilled pathologist who knew exactly what to look for in an autopsy could distinguish this from the real thing. I thought that was a very surprising and shocking thing to hear from this particular man at that particular time. This and the business of the cancer cure really stand out sharply in my memory because they were so shocking and at that time seemed to me out of character. He then went on to talk about nutrition and exercise, sort of in the same framework. People would have to eat right and exercise right to live as long as before. So in other words, because of all the toxins that were being introduced, they'd have to keep themselves even fitter. Most won't, it states here. This, in the connection of nutrition, there was no specific statement that I can recall as to particular nutrients that would be either inadequate or in excess. In retrospect, I tend to think he meant high salt diets and high fat diets would predispose towards high blood pressure and premature arteriosclerotic heart disease. And that if people were too dumb or too lazy to exercise as they should, then their dietary, their calculating fats go up and predisposed to disease. He said something about diet information, about proper diet. Now, what he also goes on about here, which is really interesting, says basically there's going to be an epidemic of running, right? That people are going to be running, and training shoes are going to be really, really popular. Now, isn't that amazing? 1969, because that is one of the most standout things in the whole thing. Because nobody could argue with that, could they? Everyone wears trainers, and everyone is obsessed with trainers.
Yeah, people,
they're all.
People are going to be busting their necks to go out and spend £100 on a pair of trainers that they're going to use to destroy their necks and backs by running around on the roads.
Well, it's unbelievable round here, Tony, because I'm near Holloway Road at the moment, and you've got these people come home from work, and you've got the rush hour traffic bumper to bumper, and they're running through the fumes without masks on, with backpacks on, with weights in. So what a great way to destroy your knees,
Yeah.
I mean, it's perfect, isn't it? You couldn't find a better way to actually ruin your joints than doing that.
And I speak from experience. I was a long-distance runner at school and that, and I'd done my knee in before I'd left school. I had water on the knee and had trouble with it ever since from running. So there you go.
Yeah, it's amazing. These people are going to be crippled, and it's like it is an epidemic, that running or jogging, And I think I read years ago the guy who actually invented jogging, or invented the terminology of jogging, actually died from jogging, And the research into it was that if you went jogging, you would the only time that you'd get extra added onto your life was the time you actually spent jogging.
Yeah,
it was kind of. I think I'd have to dig that report out because it's something I read in the 90s. But it did. I mean, I like going for a run, but I mean, running on concrete is just so bad for you.
Yeah.
And then putting weights in a backpack and then running. Yeah. I just can't get my head around it. It's like beyond ridiculous to me.
Yeah, and the younger you do that sort of thing, the worse it is as well, because your bones don't stop developing until around about the age of 21. So if you look into archaeology at the skeletons of archers, for example, you'll see in their skeletons they've got lots of deformities in their shoulders and their backs and their necks, where at a young age they was training to do this, and it obviously caused them a lot of pain throughout their lives. So if you want to get fitter, walking and swimming are the two best forms of exercise, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, fast walking. That's a really good thing, that fast walking. You don't see anyone doing it now. I used to be brilliant at that. I used to love it, fast walking.
Yeah, that's right. Whatever happened to that? You used to see that everywhere, didn't you? On a Sunday, you'd have trouble getting here, there, and because of the walking races. I don't see that anymore.
Yeah, that's a really good thing, and that's actually quite lighter on the joints. It's a lot better for you. But yeah, it's kind of side issues. But yeah, that's a major one, isn't it? Like running and trainers. Everyone would be running, he says. People running everywhere.
Yeah, well, he got it spot on.
Absolutely, because he said it was going to be cheaper than going to gyms, you see. So it's really interesting.
What's not cheaper than going to a gym?
Well, I don't go to a gym, but
no, they're blooming expensive.
I suppose going to Wetherspoons, that's my only one and only plug this week. Blending all religions, the old religions will have to go. Another area of discussion was religion. This is an avowed atheist speaking, he said. And he said, religion is not necessarily bad. A lot of people seem to need religion with its mysteries and rituals, so they will have religion. But the major religions of today have to be changed because they are not compatible with the changes to come. The old religions will have to go, especially Christianity. Isn't that the truth? That is one that's really been destroyed. Once the Roman Catholic Church is brought down, the rest of Christianity will follow easily. Then a new religion can be accepted for use all over the world. It will incorporate something from all of the old ones to make it more easy for people to accept. Now, this is very interesting because this is exactly what the Catholic Church did up to 1,000 years ago. They started incorporating paganism into the Catholic Church, which is, of course, what the heretics, the Protestants, and the people were actually the followers of Martin Luther were opposed to. And another thing they were opposed to was the Roman Church being the dispensers of the Bible. And that's another thing that comes up here. It says changing the Bible through revisions of key words. Now, somebody wrote to me recently about this, and it was about a passage which I haven't got in front of me, but he said they've changed this bit about lions and lambs. and it was kind of weird. It's that it ties in with something like they call that the Mandela effect. You know, when people are saying things are changing. You've heard of this, haven't you, Tony?
Yep.
Yeah, the Mandela effect. It's kind of similar thing, but they're actually talking about real changes that are going in, and he was saying that this has happened a lot in the King James version. I think it has. You can generally see both versions. You can see older versions online, then compare them with the new versions. And basically what they do is they bland it out and they take away the actual meaning, especially with things to do with law, which is interesting.
Very.
In order to do this, the Bible will be changed. It will be rewritten to fit the new religion. Gradually, keywords will be replaced with new words having various shades of meaning. Exactly what I just said. That's just what I was saying. Yeah. Then the meaning attached to the new words can be close to the old word. And as time goes on, other shades of meaning of that word can be emphasized. And then gradually that word replaced with another word. I don't know if I'm making that clear, but the idea is that everything in Scripture need not be rewritten, just key words replaced by other words. And the variability in meaning attached to any word can be used as a tool to change the entire meaning of Scripture and therefore make it acceptable to this new religion. Most people won't know the difference, and this was another one of the times where he said, the few who do notice the differences won't be enough to matter. And isn't that always the case? Yes. And he carries on here. Yeah, he says, the churches will help us. Then followed one of the most surprising statements of the whole presentation. He said, some of you probably think the churches won't stand for this. And he went on to say, the churches will help us. There was no elaboration on this. It was unclear just what he had in mind when he said the churches will help us. In retrospect, I think some of us now can understand what he meant. At the time, I recall then only of thinking, no, they won't. And remembering our Lord's words where he said to Peter, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and gates of hell will not prevail against it. So, yes, some people in the church might help. And in the subsequent 20 years, we've seen how some people in churches have helped. But we also know that our Lord's words will stand and the gates of hell will prevail. That's his opinion coming in there. Restructuring education as a tool of indoctrination. And this is absolutely what we've been talking about. People staying in school until they're 40 and not learning anything. And higher education and people doing these endless courses. So now you get these elderly people who are still kind of studying these pointless things. It's very weird. And a lot of people don't use any of this academic qualification. They don't use it for anything. It means that these qualifications are useless. I suppose the good thing about a degree is that it teaches you, trains you to work through something and be able to properly analyze it. But I suppose it's all down to the content. I mean, if the content's nonsense, then what's the point? This is the whole thing about it, really, that you've got people who they don't know anything and they don't really want to know anything. I find that quite a lot. Restructuring education tool of indoctrination. Yes, it said one of the things in connection with education that, remember, connecting with what he said about religion was, in addition to changing the Bible, he said that the classics in literature would be changed. I seem to recall Mark Twain's writing was given as an example, but he said the casual reader reading a revised version of a classic would never even suspect that there was any change. And somebody would have to go through word by word to even recognize that any change was made in these classics. The changes would be so subtle, but the changes would be such as to promote the acceptability of the new system. Now, this is where I think keeping books is such an important thing, because I've got certain books that I use for reference, and I would never let them go because they are of constant use to reference. So I think that's a really good thing to do, is build up a library of useful books and make sure they get passed on. And this whole idea, obviously, of Kindle and all the rest of it and everything being able to be changed, you know, it's not a book anymore. So it's all about subversion. Yeah. You can see that happening everywhere.
Yes, you've had more news speak there. We're talking about in the Bible. I've seen quite a few preachers of different denominations making claims about the changes in the Bible and this Mandela effect thing. Maybe we could do something on that sometime. It's quite interesting. I've got a few bits and pieces of my own there with that don't seem to make any sense. There is a couple of comments. Have we got time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so mainstream propaganda media is full of cancer propaganda adverts. They are very skillfully produced so as to pull at people's emotions. And that was from Eric. I wouldn't know because I don't watch any mainstream and I haven't watched any adverts when I did watch telly for at least, 15 years. I used to just hit the mute button and do something else when they were on.
No, I have seen that, and it's absolutely true. And I would say charities are even worse. Charities, these fake charities, in my opinion, are much worse than that.
Yeah.
For as little as £3 a month. Oh yeah, okay.
Well, that is one of the reasons why I gave up the thing. We've talked about it before on there, but when I had a Sky TV for me sport and documentaries and that, I decided that I'd seen enough kids and animals in distress and begging at me during my dinner and gambling adverts as well. I take umbrage at that, and I weren't having that in my house anymore. So I got rid about 6 years ago, and it won't never be coming back, none of that. So there's another one from Eric as well. Let's face it, if peace breaks out, the war industry will lose a lot of money. If famine in Africa were cured, the charity industries would lose a lot of money. And if cancer was cured, then the cancer industry would end. Yes, exactly. That's right. All those things would disappear, and no one wants to lose their income, do they? Right.
Well, this is absolutely it. And charities, that's been in the news recently, obviously with Oxfam. And I know how Oxfam works. They actually, on a local level, they put other businesses out of business. I know that for a fact. And that was given me under very good authority by a guy who's got a bookshop in town in Kent. And they're one of the most specialised bookshops in the country. It's brilliant. We talk about preserving literature. These places, these bookshops, they're trying to close. He told me how Oxfam operated, and they are trying to close bookshops. They're probably trying to close a lot of other businesses down as well. So in my opinion, in my experience, I wouldn't have anything to do with them whatsoever.
No.
But that's just my opinion, of course. More time in schools, but they won't learn anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's probably why Common Core wants them from the cradle to the grave now. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
It says here in 1969, people would be very specialised in their own area of expertise. Well, I wouldn't say that people are. I'd say they specialise in areas, but I wouldn't say of expertise in anything. It's very difficult to find anyone who's got expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Expertise is something that has to be learned over a long period of time. You can't call yourself an expert if you just do a 3-year course.
Yes.
You see. But they won't be able to get a broad education and won't be able to understand what is going on overall, which is exactly the point. In other words, it's all a big conspiracy, is it? I mean, you get this from people in their 30s and 40s. It's ridiculous. They don't even want to look into anything.
Uh-huh.
And that's just mental laziness, isn't it? Again, television training is a big part of it, and actors in front of green screens telling everyone to give their guns up, all the rest of it. Yeah, controlling who has access to information. He was already talking about computers in education. At that time, he said anybody who wanted computer access or access to books that were not directly related to their field of study would have to have a very good reason for so doing. Otherwise, access would be denied. Well, we can see the beginnings of that, and we've seen that happening for a long time.
Yep.
And if you think about that on a broader page, that happens when you are trying to get access to anything. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, if you're trying to get access to something you've got rights to have, as I've tried to do for 2 years with this. I won't bore people with the Kent police story, but it's all online, and there is more to come on that. But the point is that you ask these bodies that are there to legally serve you to do their job, and they will not give you information. They will make a lie up and then say, it's data protection. It's got nothing to do with data protection. It's actually information that you're entitled to. So this happens at every level. They block information at every level, which I think is really important. We need to create libraries, underground libraries, where people who need this information can find it. Look at the Vatican Library. They've got everything. And we should be actually able to do this. Now, I've been around the Metropolitan Archive recently, and there's certain parts of history that I don't think they want to look at there, but there's some amazing documents there. It's about the history of London. You know, you go back to 1500s and look at documents. It's absolutely amazing. But when you go there, you have to register. They have to know your name and address. They have to know what you want to look at it for. And you've got people staring at you all the time when you're looking at the documents. That's an example, but you still have access there, But this is all about the withdrawing of your rights to have access to public documents. And books are a great example of all this. We will have to do something on this Mandela effect, actually, in the way things are changing. We'll get some examples together and do a good show on it. So that's about all we've got time for. And I'll cover some more on this in the weeks to come. And thanks, everyone, for joining in. And we'll see you soon on Windows on the World.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers, Mark. Well done.
Thanks, Tony.
Reversal of the poles.